10C, and welcome to Jogvid with Miss Whittaker. Write down today's date, underline it with a ruler, then start the Do Now quiz. Off you go. Pause me while you do the Do Now quiz. Great, so you will have noticed that these questions are based on what we learned last lesson, and if you scroll down onto the next page, you can green pen your answers from the answers that I've done for you there. Just pause me while you green pen those answers. Good, so a couple of points that we need to go through. Infiltration. Infiltration is when water goes into the soil. So rain lands on the surface of the land and then it infiltrates into the soil. If that surface is impermeable, so if it's in an urban area, there's a lot of concrete. Concrete's an impermeable surface, so the water can't infiltrate into that. So it flows over the top as surface runoff. So if you create more green spaces, the water can infiltrate into the soil because soil, green spaces, they're permeable surfaces. The second point is that we need to work on being more specific and including names and facts in our writing. So rather than just saying noise pollution prevents animals from mating, from hearing mating calls, specify an example of an animal that can't hear the mating call, which we know is the European tree frog. Okay, going to start off with a bit of feedback from last lesson's 9 marker. That was the one about to what extent you agree and traffic congestion. I've read some really great answers on this. Hannah, Emily, Jennifer, Morgan and Nick, your answers were the best. All of you guys, you had a clear structure with an introduction. You'd written 2 paragraphs that argued opposite points. So one that environmental was more severe, and then the next that social was less severe, or the other way around. But you had 2 paragraphs that argued opposite points, and you also had a conclusion that summed up your argument. There were also very clear chains of reasoning in your answers. We're really getting the hang of this now. So they addressed the question and your points were expanded in that chain of reasoning using connectives. Few things that we need to do next time. We need to remember that we only write 1 point in each paragraph. I know that you know loads of great geography. Unfortunately, in the exam, you're just not going to have time to write all the good geography you know down. So pick 1 point and do that point really well. You get more marks for the explanation than you do for just knowing lots of stuff. We also need to make sure that we're including a specific place, even if the question doesn't ask for it. So sometimes we've answered questions which were using a named NEE, talk about an urban planning strategy. And it's really obvious in that case that you need to use a named place. Sometimes the question doesn't ask for that, but we're good geographers, and good geographers study the real world. They don't just study theory. So even if the question doesn't ask for it, include a case study, a specific place in the question. So in this case, we've been studying traffic congestion in London. So you need to name London in your answer and make your answer specific to London. And the way to make your answer specific is to include names and facts. So I'd already mentioned that you could have mentioned in your answer that it has traffic pollution causes air pollution, which has an impact on the European tree frog. Lots of you had already included specifics like traffic pollution causes respiratory illnesses such as asthma. That was great to see. I need to see more specifics like that in your answers. They don't have to be facts. It can just be names and place names. We need to make sure that we are reading the question really carefully. That's why the planning stage is so important. So make sure before you're answering the question, you're annotating it. You write it out, annotate it. Pick out what are the keywords in that question. What are my 2 paragraphs going to be about? what is the specific knowledge that I'm going to put in each paragraph? And then go from there. If you don't plan your question, you'll make silly errors. So a couple of people wrote about the causes of traffic congestion rather than the effects. So a cause is why something happened. And you correctly identified that the causes of traffic congestion are London's increasing population caused by international migration and natural increase. But the question was asking for effects. And an effect is something that happens as a result of something else. So the effect of you studying hard and doing the work that I'm setting this worksheet is that you're going to get great geography results. That's the effect. So you need to make sure you're reading the question. If it asks for effects, you need to speak about effects, not the causes. In this question, it was the social and environmental effects. A couple of people wrote about the economic effects. Economic effects are things to do with jobs and money. Social effects, that's things to do with people's health, education and housing. Environmental effects, that's things to do with nature. So make sure that if it specifies what kind of effects you need to talk about, you're talking about social and environmental. An easy way to make sure that you do that is underline those words, social and environmental in the question, then just annotate it. Annotate environmental, or that's nature, habitats. Annotate social, housing, healthcare and education. And then you know that you're answering the question. I was really, really impressed with Emily's paragraph. It was awesome. So I'm going to share that with you now. What I've done is I've highlighted the bits that are really good, which is all of it, for different reasons. And then on the right, I've said why that bit is good. So Emily started off with a concise introduction that answered the question. Then she moved on to an application sentence that again answered the question. To some extent, I agree with the statement because environmental effects due to traffic congestion takes away habitats from animals. What Emily's done really well is her explanation. In her explanation, every sentence explains the last sentence, so there are no gaps in the explanation. A few people have written an explanation, but there were bits missing from that explanation. If you think I need to explain the sentence before every time you write, then you'll make sure that you're not missing out bits of your explanation. Let's just read through Emily's to see how she's done that. Habitats are lost because more roads are getting built. Due to the roads getting built, it means that there'll be a loss of green space. Having a loss of green space will affect habitats of animals, as they will be destroyed due to the new roads. Due to this, some animals are unable to change habitat and unable to call for a mate, e.g. tree frogs. If animals are unable to call for a mate, it means that their species are at risk of getting extinct because they're not reproducing more of them. So can you see that the first part of her sentence summarises what has been said before, and then she expands on it to explain it. She's also using specific examples that she's taken from the reading. So I've highlighted that in purple. She's named an animal that is at risk, and that's the tree frog. Just a general rule of thumb, avoid writing EG in your answers. It seems a bit sloppy. So just put for example instead, but it's really great that we've got an example in here. What your job is to do next is to complete the actions you were set individually when I gave feedback on your work. So if you sent your work in to me, at the bottom there was a section called actions, and I wrote you a couple of actions to green pen on your work. If you've not got individual feedback, use Emily's answers above to improve your work. Read through Emily's answer, have a read through again of what I think is really good about it, then read through your answer. Have you included a concise introduction? Have you got a concise application sentence? Have you explained your points really well? And have you got specific examples in there? If you're missing any of those things, green pen your answer, add them in, or redraft your answer. Just to be clear, Emily did write 2 paragraphs, but I've just shown you the first one. pause me while you complete your green penning. Right, so now we understand why traffic congestion is a challenge for London. We can begin to think about how traffic congestion could be solved. And we'll read through the reading below on the solutions to traffic congestion in London. I'll read through the reading. You track the reading as I read through it. Couple of words that we might not know. Integrated is linked together. So in an integrated transport system, you can move from one form of transport to another. So you might get off the tube and get straight onto a bus. You wouldn't have to walk anywhere to get onto those. They're connected together. A borough is like a neighbourhood of London. It's an area of London. Right. Tracking the reading, integrated transport system. London has one of the largest transport networks in the world, with integrated bus, river and road systems spanning the city's 32 boroughs. Passengers can travel from buses, the underground, overground trains and river buses. Passengers may pay for the transport using contactless payment cards or Oyster cards. You can put money onto an Oyster card at a dedicated terminal. The card is accepted for all forms of transport. These payments reduce delay, because people do not have to find cash or input their PINs into card machines. A cap limits how much you pay for all journeys in one day or a week. Passengers can make as many journeys as they like, and when all their fares add up to a certain amount, they're not charged for any more. Your fare is automatically capped. There are different caps for the times of day you travel, peak and off-peak, and the transport you use. Passengers can use as much transport as they like in one day, but the cost is capped. The Oyster cards also track passengers' movements and use this data to make the transport system more efficient. Buses travel in bus lanes, so all forms of public transport avoid traffic congestion, making journeys on public transport faster than journeys by car. Great, let's just summarise what that reading is telling us. So London's transport system is linked together. They've got lots of different transport. For the underground, river buses, overground trains, actual buses, and you can pay for all of those using something called an Oyster card. When you go into an underground station, there are barriers, and all you do is you tap your Oyster card or your normal debit card or credit card onto sensors at the barriers, and it automatically charges you and then lets you through the barriers. All of your trips are recorded on the Oyster card, and if you use lots of transport in the day, they'll limit the amount that you spend. So I think if you travel between zones 1 and 7, you get capped out, you get limited at about £11. If you travel just within central London, you'll pay less. The advantages of the Oyster card is that you don't have to queue behind people who are trying to find all their change. So it speeds up the system, and because they're recording your data, they can use your travel data to make the system better. Track the end of the reading on the next page. However, most passengers use public transport on their commute to work in the morning from 6:30 to 9 o'clock, and on their commute home from work in the evening from 5 to 7. Consequently, at these times, the network is overcrowded. After several years of overcrowding on London's trains, in 2018 the number of people choosing to travel on London's morning rush hour trains fell by 7,000 people in the last year. Many chose to work at home to avoid the stressful commute to work, and others chose to use taxis instead. London has the highest number of taxis per person in the UK. People on low incomes struggle to pay the cost of using public transport. London's transport is expensive compared to other global cities, which means the poorest residents cannot afford the commute to work. The Standard reported that 60% of Londoners have skipped work in period of financial difficulty to avoid paying transport costs, and 50% of Londoners have taken out a high-cost loan to cover periods of financial difficulty. So, there are, as usual, positive and negatives of things in geography. Because there's such a high population density, lots of people are living close to each other in London, the transport can get overcrowded, but it gets overcrowded at specific times, when people travel to work and when people travel back from work. And that overcrowding, you can see in that picture, is a stressful experience. So some people choose to avoid it by working from home, or they get a taxi. And as usual, people on low incomes struggle to access things. So they're struggling to access the public transport because they can't afford it. Even though the public transport is capped if you travel a lot, if you're on a really low income, say you're one of the 37% in Newham, in poverty, you're on a really low income, you will be unable to afford the public transport. Right, we're going to do another flow diagram now. The flow diagram on the next page explains the advantages and the disadvantages of London's integrated transport system. Using the reading we've just gone through together, fill in the missing gaps on the flow diagram. Each gap is numbered. Write down the number of the box in your yellow exercise followed by the answer. So here's the flow diagram. You're filling in the blank boxes. So, Oyster cards allow people to move between transport types easily. Underground and bus lanes avoid congestions. Why is that a positive? The boxes on the white background, they're positives. The boxes on the grey background are negatives. Pause me while you fill in that flow diagram. Off you go. Great, so let's look at the answers together. Oyster cards allow people to move between transport types easily. Underground and bus lanes avoid congestions. This means that the travel times are reduced. People aren't getting stuck in traffic because they're on public transport, so they can move quickly through London. Because it's such a fast way and easy way to get to work, 44% of people commute to work by public transport. That means that there aren't as many cars on the road because people are using public transport instead, so the effects of traffic congestion will be reduced. The Oyster cards also enable commuters, that's people who travel to work, commuters to be tracked. The travel data is then used to improve the transport system. And that makes it better, which just encourages people to use it. And if more people are using it, less people are going to be using their cars, so the effects of traffic congestion are reduced. Let's look at the disadvantages now. There is overcrowding at peak times when people are travelling to and when people are travelling back from work. Some of the buses are unreliable, they don't always turn up at the time that they're meant to turn up, even though they are in bus lanes. So they shouldn't be affected too badly by the traffic congestion. But there aren't bus lanes everywhere in London, and buses can still get delayed. Because of the overcrowding and because of the unreliable buses, using public transport can be quite stressful. So people choose to use alternatives, and we know that one of the alternatives people use is taxis. London has the highest number of taxis per person in the UK. The cost of transport in London is higher than other global cities. For example, the cost of public transport in Paris is a lot lower. This means that the poorest people can't afford the transport, so they can't afford the commute to work. Proof of that is that 60% of people in London, according to the Standard newspaper, 60% of people in London have skipped work due to financial difficulties. So they get into a situation where they don't have enough money. And one of the ways that they save money is by not going into work because they can't afford the transport to get to work. And 51% of Londoners have taken out a high-cost loan. So they've borrowed money which has a lot of interest on it. Interest is money that you have to pay back. So if you take out a loan, you don't get that loan for free. You've got to pay back that loan plus interest. So when people run out of money, they take out loans. The problem is that they then got to pay back that loan and the interest. So they end up paying back more money than they borrowed in the first place. And 51% of Londoners have taken out a high cost loan, so a loan where they're going to have to pay a high amount more back. A high cost loan is a loan where you have to pay a large amount of money back, a large amount of money more than the money you borrowed. The integrated transport system is not the only solution to London's traffic congestion problem. Another solution is the cycle hire scheme. Let's go through the cycle hire scheme reading now. In this reading, cardiovascular disease means heart disease. Tracking the reading, cycle hire scheme. Since it started in 2010, the London Cycle Hire Scheme has been called Boris Bikes, Barclays Bikes and Santander Bikes. Visit London states London's public bike sharing scheme, Santander Cycles, is available 24/7, 360 days a year. There are more than 750 docking stations and 11,500 bikes in circulation across London. Getting started is easy. Simply hire a bike, ride it where you like, then return it to any of the hundreds of docking stations across the city. It costs £2 to access the bikes for 24-hour bike access, and the first 30 minutes of each journey is free. Longer journeys cost £2 for each additional 30 minutes. You can hire a bike as many times as you like within the bike access period you've purchased. The average distance between docking stations is only 400 metres, so you can dock your bike near your destination. London's cycle hire scheme has been successful in the centre of London, with over 1 million cycle rides taken in the first 10 weeks. Cycling is a convenient way for people to fit exercise into their daily routines. Importantly, studies have also shown that cycling is easier to stick to, requiring less willpower than other types of exercises. People who exercise are less likely to develop illnesses, such as cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and stress. However, the bicycle docking stations are mostly in the city centre, which means people who live in boroughs outside the centre have less access to the bikes. These people living outside the city centre are more likely to be in poverty. Therefore, the financial and health benefits of the bicycles are not reaching those who need them the most. Furthermore, the bikes have limited effect on traffic congestion. Most of the people who use the bikes were already using other forms of public transport. The scheme has been criticised for using 4 diesel vans to transport the bikes between docking stations. The bikes are moved to make sure that at the end of the day there are enough bikes in each docking station for the next day. But people have argued they should be used using electric cars, although the carbon emissions of the vans is very limited. Right, let's sum up the cycle hire scheme. What happens is you go to one of these docking stations. You pay £2, although the first 30 minutes is free. You then borrow a bike from the docking station and cycle around London. When you get to where you want to go, you look for another docking station and you just pop the bike back in. Because there's lots of docking stations in the centre of London, it should be really easy to find a docking station near where you want to go. That's why it's been really successful. 1 million cycle rides were taken in the first week, 10 weeks. And cycling has health benefits. If you exercise, for example, by cycling, you're less likely to get heart disease or cardiovascular disease. You're less likely to get type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes affects people who are obese. If you're exercising more, you're less likely to be obese, so you're less likely to get type 2 diabetes. And people who exercise get less stressed. But the bikes are mainly located in the city centre, so people who live outside the centre can't access them as much. And because the rents are so high in London city centre, it's the poorest people who live around the outskirts. So they have less access to the bikes. In Newham, for example, there are very few docking stations. What we're going to do now is fill in the flow diagram on the next page that explains the advantages and disadvantages of London's integrated transport system. Using the reading, fill in the missing gaps on the flow diagram. Each gap is numbered. Write the number of the box in the yellow exercise book, followed by the answer. It's exactly the same as we did for the integrated transport system. Again, the disadvantages are got the grey background, and the advantages are on the white background. Pause me while you fill in that flow diagram. Okay, let's go for it. So the fact that the docking stations are 400 metres apart and that you get 30 minutes free hire means that lots of different people can use the bikes. They're accessible to all. Consequently, 1 million cycle rides were taken in the first 10 weeks. So it was in the centre of London, it was a really popular scheme. It reduces health problems like cardiovascular diseases, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. That's going to lead to increased life expectancies, which is going to put less strain on healthcare services. But, okay, most of the people using these bikes were already using public transport. So they've just swapped from going on the tube or the buses to cycling. So actually, that hasn't done anything about traffic congestion. It's not people that were in their cars that are now cycling. It's people that weren't using their cars, they were using buses and tubes. So the overall number of cars on the road has stayed the same. They're only available in the city centre. They're not accessible to the poorer boroughs on the outskirts. Okay, so there's little impact on transport for London's poorest. They have been criticised for being transported using diesel vans. Obviously, the vans are burning diesel, so there's going to be a small CO2 impact, but really small. There's only 4 vans. And so there is a very, very minimal contribution to climate change. Right. If this work has taken you less than an hour, now is a good time to do some revisions. So, if you got less than 8 out of 10 on the Do Now quiz, you need to revise the flow diagrams from last lesson. I've put these on the last 2 pages, they're down here. These 2 flow diagrams from last lesson. The way to revise those is read through the flow diagram, cover up the diagram, and then explain it out loud. Or if you want, you can write it out. So read through, cover, explain it out loud. Repeat that until you can explain it confidently. If you've got some time left and you got 8 out of 10 or above on the requiz, choose some requizzes that you're less confident on from your quiz books. Keep on emailing me any questions. My email's on epraise, it's at the bottom of all the worksheets. And if you want to read some more about the things that we've studied today, at the bottom of your worksheet there are some articles and videos below. I've also put in a bit about Crossrail. When we looked at counter-urbanisation in Binfield, we looked at Crossrail very briefly. And so there's some more information on Crossrail there. It's also, Crossrail goes from Reading to the centre of London. So it is also a strategy to reduce traffic congestion if you want to look at Crossrail in more detail. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Bye from me.